Thanks for tuning in today. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist. Join me as I seek out small incremental changes being applied in other industries that we can learn from and that can be applied in healthcare. Can these changes bring immediate value, but also add up to that big improvement and the revolution we need in healthcare? Come along with me to explore the possibilities. My innovative guests from around the globe have used small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot. And today, I'm talking to Alfred Poor. He's the editor and publisher of Health Tech Insider, amongst other things. Alfred, thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
So you have this incredible history going back into the depths of time of technology and the innovation. You've been watching, you've been closely aligned to it. You worked at PC Magazine in the very early days. Tell us a little bit about those experiences and some of the things that you saw from that time.
Well, yeah, I hope I'm not quite that old, but but yeah, I was there. I'm very fortunate. I had a front row seat for the explosion of the personal computer, and I started writing for free. I was a freelance writer for PC Magazine for over 20 years, and I started, I think, in their second or third year. So I was right in there at the beginning. And the thing that was fascinating to me about it then was it was a very frothy, exciting, messed up, energetic environment where all kinds of things were happening all at once. And there was incredible duplication of effort. There were just these, rapid shoots coming off the tree in all directions, the majority of which died off, as you would expect. But at the time, you really didn't have any idea which ones were going to be the winners and succeed, and which ones were going to eventually wither and disappear. And it was powered by a group of people on the whole who were really smart and really creative and really committed. And so there was a whole energy to this environment where lots of stuff was going on. And I joke about the fact that it's a whole lot easier to write about technology than to actually build anything. And I've certainly enjoyed that position for my career. But to be more serious about it, I firmly believe, I believe back then and I believe to this day, that part of my role in this is not necessarily to invent, but to connect. There's so much going on, and there's so much where one person doesn't know what's going on literally on the other side of the wall from them. And I get to see all that from 30,000 feet and help make people make connections and put things together. So, but that was a big part of what was going on in those early days of the IBM PC compatibles and all the effort that people were putting in to try to figure out how to make things work. I mean, in those days, it wasn't, we weren't amazed when things worked well. We were amazed that they just worked at all. So it was a very heady time.
So one of the things that strikes me as you're sharing those details is that maybe one of the incremental things that occurred through that journey and some of the successes was about the co-location or the sharing of that information adjacent possible, let's call it. Mm-hmm. Was that part of what was going on? Did you see some of that in some of the stories that you wrote, some of the things that came together in terms of innovation?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll give you a great example. I mean, well, first of all, it wasn't that big an industry. Comdex was a huge show, PC Expo was a huge show, but pretty much everybody knew everybody. And so there was a lot of exchange of ideas that went along. But one of my favorite stories about all this is PC Magazine used to do an issue every year devoted to printers. We would review every new printer that came out for the market. And it was the most read issue for the entire year. And they were publishing 26 issues a year. Most read, stayed on the shelf the longest, had the highest pass along rate. And it was one of the key bits of that whole industry. And One year, IBM came out with a new printer called the Pro Printer. This was back in the days of 9-pin dot matrix printers, if you can remember that far back. But this one was awesome. It handled cut sheets of paper. It handled envelopes. It had handled the pin feed, continuous paper. It did a whole lot of things really well. The control panel was great. And as often was the case, the project manager came to PC Magazine to demonstrate it for us, and brought along part of his team, and would show it to us before it was released. And we were all impressed with it just at the first glance, just seeing what it could do. And he said, well, here's how we got here. He said, last year when the PC Magazine printer project issue came out, I bought a whole lot of copies, and I walked into my team meeting and I passed them around. And I said, here are the design specs for our new printer. Anything that PC Magazine liked goes into the printer. Anything that they don't like better not be there. And to me, it was just, to this day, it's a story about the power of this above the ground view that we as tech writers have the opportunity to do. And we were able to study this in great detail that was powerfully useful to companies out there that were actually making things. And so it's a great story.
I love that, because what it says to me is that's the original user design story, because you were essentially featuring the user input, which was hard to get, but you were essentially establishing that through that reporting and all of the experiences. That's fantastic. So,
and we were informed users. The problem back then, and even today, well, especially today, if you look at some of what passes as technology journalism, there are people writing about things that don't know the context, they don't know the history, they don't even know the use case, and arbitrarily saying, oh, this is good, this is bad, I like it, I don't like it. PC Magazine, we were instilled at PC Magazine, actually. Bill McCrone, the late Bill McCrone, was editor, and he established the goal of being better than Consumer Reports. He's had Consumer Reports as the gold standard. Meaningful testing that's repeatable and accurate and reliable. And that was the goal for PC Magazine Labs. And so we tested things not just as users, but as informed users. What are people actually trying to do with these machines? What's going to get in the way? What's going to make their life easier? What's going to make things more productive? And it was a golden era of product review. I don't think we'll ever see it again.
No, I don't believe so. And I do recall all of those. I do also recall the printer issue. I didn't know it was the most read issue, but it's kind of interesting to hear that. So fast forward to today, you've got a whole host of sort of insights around healthcare, technology, wellness, wearables. One of the things that I constantly feel is, have we seen this movie before?
Exactly. And I mean, I walk around CES now. By the way, when I go to CES, I spend almost the entire week in the South Hall, just because there's more in the wearable and mobile health space than any one person could possibly see during the show. It'd probably take 2 or 3, and even then, I don't think you could cover it all. But the thing that I'm struck by, that really hit me the first time last year, but also again this year, is I see that same frothy, energetic, inefficient, sort of random movement within the industry, with so much going on, and this enthusiasm and this passion to do good. It's very familiar with the early days of the PC compatibles. I haven't seen anything like it until now, and it's a lot of fun to be part of it.
So the good news is that sort of suggests that we're going to see some great developments, innovations to take place. As you were describing it, it reminded me a lot of the Brownian motion experiment that we did, or at least I certainly did when I was in school, and this constant change to the gas cloud, but ultimately, when you look at a glass of water, there's molecules that are emerging that, randomly, and I part of me feels that you're describing something along that line. So the question is, how do we heat up the water so that more things emerge?
Well, yeah, I think part of there's a whole lot of things going on here. I mean, first of all, we have to accept the fact that, it's like the old thing about Harvard Law School: look to your left, look to your right. Two of you won't be here next year. And that's the way it is in a rapidly expanding, frothy market like this one. There's a lot of brilliant ideas out there, many of which deserve to be significant successes and have a big impact. And it's not going to happen. They're just going to fall by the wayside for many reasons: lack of management, lack of exposure, lack of a total plan. I mean, there's just a host of ways that things fail. And even when you succeed, I mean, just look at Nokia. They bought Withings. Now they're selling it back again. Just because you have a big buyout doesn't mean that you've hit the home run, that you've got it made. And incidentally, that was a familiar story back in the early days of the PC, that there were lots of acquisitions that got turned back over. And so again, it's a familiar story. How do you increase the success rate? Well, I think one of the most important things is to make sure that these entrepreneurs and the people who are putting these products together do it more efficiently. Okay, the number of well-meaning, talented, creative people who I speak to who have no clue as to what is going on outside their lab is enormous. And I see this all the time, where I'll get 3 or 4 stories in the course of a month or two about researchers who are pursuing the same goal with very similar materials, and just a total overlap. And it's a tough one to solve because there's so little barrier to entry to getting information out there, and yet the signal to noise ratio is so low, it can be very difficult to find where the useful information is. And incidentally, that's one of the major roles that I see myself filling, is trying to curate a tiny portion of that information that I think will be interesting and useful to people within the industry. And I think another part of it is before we went on the air, we were talking, and I said, there's a number of mistakes that I think startups and entrepreneurs tend to make, some of which I'm very good at. And one of my favorite mistakes is to make what people need, which sounds like a good idea, but it's a path to failure. You need to make something that the market wants. And if it's going to be successful, they're going to want it, and they're going to buy it, and then it will do what they need to have it do. But you can't lead with the need, or else you have no sales. And I don't think that most entrepreneurs understand that. They believe in the build a better mousetrap myth. If your mousetrap's better, the world's going to be the path to your door. No, the world's never going to know you exist. So you need to build a better mousetrap that has some level of appeal to the buyer, and then you need to find the ways to get that information to that targeted market that's going to be making the buying decision that's going to reverse your cash flow and make it positive. And this is a piece that I just don't, my sense of it is that a lot of these people just don't have an innate understanding for that, which is why a lot of really smart entrepreneurs get the technology rolling, get the initial funding going, and then they go out and buy a really good, smart CEO. Apple got, what's his name from Pepsi? He knew nothing about technology, but he knew about corporations and how to build big ones and how to get them running. And so, I think that's a lesson that's lost on a lot of the young startups today.
So for those of you just joining, I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist, and today I'm talking to Alfred Poor, the editor and publisher of Health Tech Insider. We were talking about the sort of success elements for companies, and as you think about those elements and think about the companies that were successful, and the story I always revert back to, in part because it was almost a family feud in our household, was the VHS and Betamax. And ultimately I backed the winner, not because it was technically superior, but it was, I guess, in your words, it was the market demand, although I think they were both fulfilling it. So what have you seen in those companies that have been successful? Is it about the leadership? Is it about the experience that they pull in that allows them to sort of make that leap, that jump?
I believe so. I mean, it's rare to have that single leader who can do everything, and it's the smart leader who assembles the team that does the things that he or she can't do, and even knows when to walk away and let the project take on its own life, and and be controlled by others, because so many companies have been sunk by a founder staying on too long and insisting on doing things this way, when and not relinquishing enough control to the management to do what needs to be done. I think that's a part of it. In terms of success, I think what I see driving success in this market, and by this market, I'm focusing on wearable and mobile and digital health technology for health and medical kinds of applications. I'm leaving the consumer smartwatches and fitness bands and things like that alone for the moment. But from my observation, I think rule one is more beats less. More features is going to be more successful than fewer features. The exception is if you have something like a continuous glucose meter that is so specifically targeted, at a specific thing, it still, stands to be able to carve a place. But think back to the early days of PDAs and cell phones and pagers, and and all. You had to have a holster to carry all the devices, right? We now have it all in one device, as well as our desktop computer and all that, and that fits in our shirt pocket, and we carry our smartphones around with us all the time. So on that principle, more features beats fewer. So the more functions, and the reason for that is Word for Windows, one of the best word processors ever. The most powerful users don't even use 20% of the features. But the point is they all use different 20%. And so if the 100% of the feature set wasn't there, they'd lose a lot of users because it wouldn't do the parts that they need. So not everybody's going to need everything, but the more sensors you've got, the more analysis that the sensors can do of the information, the more insights it can provide, is going to give you a broader footprint on the market and be more useful. So more beats less. And the second one that I'm seeing, and fortunately this has moved extremely rapidly for an industry this young, accuracy is rewarded. In the beginning, we had kids out of university throwing some off-the-shelf components together and saying, oh, look, we can measure heartbeats. We can tell how far you walked, right? Well, that's not good enough for the Philips and the Johnson & Johnsons and the IBMs of this world, right? They start from a history of creating clinical devices where accuracy isn't optional. It's it's just got to start with accuracy and build from there. And so fortunately, we're seeing a lot of these devices going through tons of clinical trials of extensive lab testing, to prove that they're actually measuring what they think they're measuring, and that there's value to the information that it produces. And so I think that clinical accuracy, that knowing that you're measuring what you think you're measuring, I think that's at this, even today, that's really table stakes to get into the market. It's no longer good enough to build a clever device. It's got to be right.
So great sort of insights. I think essential listening for folks that are trying to step into this market from people outside of the industry who I think struggle with that. It's interesting you bring up the point about the founders. One of the early pieces of advice I received when I was working with a startup was, rule number one: fire the founders. And I would say that, in all cases of rules, the exception proves the rule. And I think there are plenty of examples of folks that was not the case. But in an awful lot of instances, it's a different kind of mental set that is required to create and build and then move on into this production. And Scully, as you described, was sort of the builder of additional sort of capability and added that value. So I think that's great. So we've got a little bit of time left. I wanted to maybe tease out some of the things that you've potentially seen, something that you think is exciting in the future of the healthcare space. I know you sort of focused on the accuracy level and the need for sort of what I would call consistency as part of that. Anything that you've seen that really stood out to you that, if you were to put a stake in the ground, you'd say, yep, I can see this emerging and just changing the way that we use the healthcare system?
So I like to talk about devices that disappear into our lives. All right, a smartwatch that I have to take off and charge every night isn't all that convenient. My $25 Timex that runs for 3 years on a battery disappears. I don't have to think about it unless I want to see what time it is. And so this disappearing, I think, is a really essential component. One of the examples of this is if you've ever, I have an irregular heartbeat. I've got a atrial fib, and I have more than once had to wear a Holter monitor, which is not convenient to say the least. And it's, doesn't record for very long, and it's restrictive in what you can do. And we are already seeing from multiple sources these patches that you just stick on your skin like a Band-Aid or a plaster if you're from another side of the pond. And they're now making them so that they're can be powered and working for 2 or 3 weeks, and you don't have to take it off to shower. You don't have to think about it. It's just there. I mean, hospitals are using them now to monitor vitals remotely, without having staff to run around and on the floor to take temperature and heart rate and all that stuff. And as these get out into the field and get tied to telehealth, we're going to find that they produce a much more convenient and effective approach. And another piece is artificial intelligence, pushing off decisions to machines that can make them accurately, often 80, 90, 95% accurately, which is often better than what trained physicians can do. We just read up one about detecting a test that can be administered and analyzed without the help of a specially trained technician for diabetic retinopathy. And that this can be done in a primary physician's office in a few minutes could save the vision for millions of people with diabetes. And so it's the next level of automation using artificial intelligence, deep learning, neural networks, and that sort of thing. And I think that's what's going to give us the leverage to lower the cost, increase improve the outcomes, and result in better results for people with all kinds of health issues, from the mundane to the chronic and serious.
Fantastic. So Thanks, Alfred. It's been always a pleasure to spend some time, hear some of your insights. It's always exciting. I think I agree with you with the frothiness, the excitement, the innovation that's taking place in this space. So I appreciate you joining me on the show and look forward to the next several months of innovation. So thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much. I'm looking forward to the months and the years. We've got a lot of excitement ahead of us.
Always. So thanks for joining me today. Do you have any better ideas, or have you found a small incremental change that's brought about a big improvement in your world? Let's continue the conversation on our hashtag, the Incrementalist, or share with me at Dr. Nick1 on Twitter. You can find more information about the show on our program page at healthcarenowradio.com. And tune in next time to hear my discussions with leaders and innovators from around the globe who've revolutionized their space by using small incremental improvements to achieve their moonshot. I'm Dr. Nick, the Incrementalist, and I'm starting a revolution through evolution.